Well, good afternoon and welcome to Gedling Borough Council's Selective Licensing Consultation event for landlords and managing agents. This event is being broadcast live via Microsoft Teams and is being recorded and then will be subsequently published on our website. I'm David Ellis. I'm the Councillor's portfolio holder with responsibility for public protection. Part of my remit includes overseeing improvements in standards in private sector housing and tackling crime and antisocial behaviour. These three services in my portfolio are central to selective licensing and linked to a number of the Council's priorities around tackling crime and antisocial behaviour, improving health and well-being and promoting a sustainable environment. The Council's core ethos is serving people, improving lives, which is at the centre of our proposal to introduce selective licensing to improve housing conditions and property management. The purpose of this event is to provide further background information to landlords and agents on the Council's proposal to extend selective licensing of private rented homes in Carlton Hill, Colwick, Daybrook and Newstead Village. The proposal has been developed following the successful pilot of selective licensing in Netherfield since October 2018, and we hope you'll find this event informative and beneficial. This next slide shows the agenda for the day. You'll see from the agenda we have a presentation from the Senior Environmental Health Officer, Tom Southam, who will run through some of the findings from introducing selective licensing in Netherfield. Following from this presentation, we have a presentation from the Food, Health and Housing Manager, Sam Palmer, who will present the proposal to extend selective licensing and explain how to formally respond to the consultation. The Council is keen to seek views during the consultation which will inform our future decisions. You can submit typed questions during this event by using the MS Teams Q&A chat function. And at the end of the presentation, we will have opportunity for a question and answer session to go through any questions submitted. All the questions submitted will be considered by the Council, including any that are unanswered, which will be fed into the consultation process. I'll now hand you over to Tom Southam, who will talk through more about the Council's experience of introducing selective licensing in Netherfield. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ellis. As mentioned, my name is Tom Southam. I'm a Senior Environmental Health Officer working for Gedling Borough Council, and I oversee the Netherfield Selective Licensing Scheme. Go to the next slide, please, Nathan. So just a bit of background on the scheme. It was designated on the 1st of October 2018. It covers the whole of the Netherfield ward, and what it means practically is that all private rented dwellings within the ward are required to be licensed. The team consists of one Senior Environmental Health Officer, which is myself, and two Housing Improvement and Enforcement Officers, and a Student Placement Officer who helps with the admin. Next slide, please, Nathan. So an update on the status of the applications currently. We have received 676 applications. 35 of those applications were withdrawn either by the owner or subsequently found to be exempt from licensing, so were refunded. We have issued 470 licenses, carried out 256 property inspections. Inspections did have to be suspended due to COVID at the start of the year. And we've taken enforcement action in relation to 13 dwellings for failure to apply for a licence. In terms of what we found inside of these properties when we've carried out inspections, 220 of the properties were identified as having disrepair which needed rectifying. So these are repairs that were required to bring the houses up to the minimum legal standard, and that equates to 86%, which is a relatively high amount of the properties that we inspected. 33 properties were identified as having disrepair which presented imminent risk to the occupants or visitors to the property. So that's where the defects within the house are such that immediate action is required by the landlord or agent to rectify, because the risk is such that we can't allow the tenants or visitors to continue living in those conditions. Next slide, please. To date, we've improved 101 properties. That's where all work has been fully completed. Obviously, a number are still ongoing. The 33 properties that we've identified with imminent risk were resolved there and then. Because of the nature of the risk, that work needed to be done immediately. We've seen an increase in landlord accreditation in the area as a result of the licensing scheme. This is linked in part to the reduced fee that's offered for accredited landlords. The council is obviously pleased to see the increase in accreditation across the scheme, and we would see that as an increase in knowledge and various other skills for landlords. There's been 17 safeguarding referrals made to partners as a result of the scheme. These consist of referrals to Nottingham Fire Service, the police. We have a community safety team that deal with safeguarding issues and antisocial behaviour issues that work at Gedling Borough Council. Referrals have been made to those when officers have gone out and identified issues that they feel need referring on. And health and housing coordinators who are also employed in-house by Gedling Borough Council, who work to reduce the burden on the NHS and help people who are in hospital return to their homes and make sure that their houses are safe for them to return so that those beds are freed up in the NHS. We also sit on fortnightly local operations meetings, which is also attended by Gedling Homes, the community safety team, which I've just mentioned previously, Notts Police and Notts Fire Service, amongst a few others. And here we're able to share intel and information across the board, so that we're all aware of schemes and operations that are going on in the area and carry out a much more joined up approach. So I'm just going to go on to some of the common hazards that we found in the properties that we've inspected. The most common, especially when it comes to imminent risk, would be the hazard of fire. Here I've used a floor plan to try and identify, or to try and help explain how a layout can cause problems in relation to fire. So the guidance to which we work says that people should be able to safely escape a property without passing through another room, which is considered to be high risk. So the plan on the left there is a property that we found when we went to inspect it. I've marked on there the means of escape from the bedroom via the red arrow. So you're passing through a kitchen and then into a corridor and then into a living room to get out of your property there. So not only are you passing through one high risk room, you're passing through two high risk rooms. So the concern there is if a fire starts in the kitchen or the living room, which are two of the most likely rooms for a fire to start, that the people that are in the bedroom would effectively be trapped. So the floor plan on the right hand side is what was proposed by the landlord as a result of our intervention to remove the imminent risk. I don't know if you can clearly see there, but what they did in effect was they've just moved the wall to the kitchen up and made the lobby slightly larger. So therefore the bedroom exits into the corridor instead of going through the kitchen. And then they've provided an escape window in the bathroom. So that's the way that they've got around that. The common issues that we're finding in relation to fire, as well as no protected means of escape, is a lack of fire detection as well. That is fairly common. Go on to the next slide, please, Nathan. So this is just an example of the work that we've carried out. On the left there, we've gone into a building that's very common in Netherfield, 2 up, 2 down. So you've got 2 rooms upstairs, and then you've got downstairs you enter into usually a lounge, and then you pass back into a dining room to go up the stairs. So in those circumstances, the tenants from their bedrooms, if there was a fire, they're having to come down through a dining room and through the lounge at the front, which isn't acceptable as per the previous slide. So we've worked with the landlord in this situation, and we've changed the window from a top opening window, which people can't escape from, into a bottom opening window that complies with the requirements for an escape window. And we do generally accept one window at first floor level. We're not requiring it in every single room in a family house. We're just requiring the one on the basis that the various different family members will pass into that room and be able to escape out that one window. Go on to the next slide, please. Another common one is electrical hazards. The main problems that we find in relation to the electrical hazard is disrepair to plug sockets and light fittings and bare live wires. Clearly these pictures on here are the most extreme cases of electrical hazards, but it does also include problems such as cracked fascias, sockets where appliances have blown in it and potentially caused a safety problem for appliances to then be used in future. The main issue that we have is live bare terminals where tenants, specifically children, could get their fingers in and cause severe harm. Damp and mould is a common hazard that's quite often reported in the media, and as landlords and agents are probably well aware of that, and it can, the council is fully aware, be caused by tenant behaviour, but in some circumstances, and actually in a lot of circumstances, it can also be through to a defect of the building as well. So problems that can cause damp and mould are defective damp proofing. You could have a water leak, which you can see in that bottom left picture there. It's a leak from the bathroom above. A defect to the fabric of the building, allowing moisture ingress, so damage to the brickwork, or maybe blocked guttering, and inadequate heating provision. So the tenant needs to be able to suitably ventilate and heat their house to be able to keep on top of damp and mould. A lot of the older properties that are in Netherfield are going to have an issue because of the thermal insulation, so we're looking at ensuring that the tenants are able to suitably heat their houses to prevent mould buildup. Excess cold, that links in with damp and mould. The two are quite closely related. Poorly maintained and inadequate heating systems. Portable electric heaters being used as the main heating system in houses, very expensive to operate. Heaters not suitable for the size of the room or not intended to be the only form of heating. So you can see there on the bottom, we've worked with the landlord to replace the portable heater with a gas central heating system, which is more appropriate for the tenant in that situation. The window at the top is indicative of a few properties that we found that maybe haven't been maintained to the standard that they should have been, where the windows are rotten. And it's making it more difficult for tenants to insulate, keep the heat into their property, and therefore keep warm. Falls on stairs and between levels is another issue that we have identified. You can see here before and after shots of some stairs and a landing. The stairs, the gaps on the risers were large enough whereby children could potentially climb through, fall through. So we've worked with the landlord to block up those gaps in the stairs to make them safe for the children living in that house. At the top of the landing on that bottom picture as well, the gaps in the pre-existing railings very large, again not compliant with the standards that we work towards. Children could fit their heads through, and we've replaced that with guarding that's such and it removes that hazard, but also discourages climbing from children moving forward and leaving it in a much more safe condition. Again, falls between levels, carry on from the previous slide. This is a property where the entrance is over a flat roof that was at first floor level, so it's quite a large drop on the side from the flat roof. We've gone round and the guarding has been knocked down, so there's effectively no guarding between the entrance to that property and the drop over the edge of the flat roof, which is a serious concern. And we've worked with the landlord there to reinstate that guard in there and safeguard those tenants and any visitors to that house. So just to summarise what we generally believe here at Gedling, the advantages to the scheme. We've seen an increase in property inspections because of the licensing scheme, and because of more inspections we've identified more hazards, and we've therefore been able to rectify more problems within these houses. Tenants, agents and landlords are now more aware of what is expected. A lot of the tenants didn't know really what they were entitled to as private tenants, what level of housing that they should be expecting. I think they found it useful to be able to have one-to-one conversations with case officers who could advise on that, and also work with the landlords to bring about improvements. A big thing as well for tenants as well is that the officers under the licensing scheme are able to go into these properties and carry out the inspections in the knowledge of the landlord's knowledge that we're there, and so the tenants don't feel like they've had to go out on a limb and complain and potentially upset the landlord or worry about any kind of repercussions of that. We've provided advice to landlords, agents and tenants in terms of what is expected in properties, in terms of what is expected in terms of management. And I think the 86% of properties having issues also indicates that whilst a number of landlords probably thought that they were maintaining their houses up to the standard that is expected by the law, 86% of those properties actually fell below that standard, which would suggest that improvements were necessary, or maybe landlords weren't aware of what was required in those properties. Certainly in relation to the fire issues, I think a lot of the conversations that the team have had with landlords where we've had to change layouts and things, it has come as a surprise to them. And that's concerning that those properties are being let in that situation where we would consider it imminent risk to those tenants. And licence conditions ensure effective management of the property. The licence gives a prescribed set of rules to licence holders. It's clear, and there's an increase of power available to the council if the conditions are not adhered to. So it's nice and clear for both sides of exactly what is expected. And that brings me to the end of my presentation.
Good afternoon. My name's Sam Palmer. I'm the Food, Health and Housing Manager. I'm just going to give you a presentation as described by Councillor Ellis, outlining the proposal to introduce phase 2 of selective licensing. So the points to be covered during my presentation are: what is selective licensing and when can it be introduced? What areas of the borough satisfy the government guidance for introducing selective licensing? And how can you respond to the consultation? So what is selective licensing? It's provision passed down to local councils by government through Section 80 of the Housing Act 2004. Where schemes are designated, it introduces a requirement for all private rented homes in a designated area to be licensed by the council. A licensing scheme can last for a maximum period of up to 5 years. Prior to implementing a scheme, the council must have completed a public consultation, as is occurring now at Gedling Council. So when can a scheme be introduced? So it's only where there are a high proportion of private rented accommodation, and the area must be suffering with one of the 6 following conditions: poor property conditions, high levels of deprivation, high levels of crime, significant or persistent antisocial behaviour, low housing demand, or high levels of migration. So where an area is suffering with one of those criteria and there's a high proportion of private rented accommodation, potentially a selective licensing scheme can be introduced. So this table summarises, as outlined in the proposal document, which is available on the council's website for landlords and stakeholders to view, to feed into the consultation. So this summarises the criteria that are satisfied in the borough for introducing selective licensing. So the 4 areas that have been identified, I'll go through them one by one. So Carlton Hill satisfies the antisocial behaviour, significant and persistent problem with antisocial behaviour and poor property conditions. Evidence outlined in the proposal shows the area features in one of 2 areas in the borough classified by the police as severity profiles, and they specifically prioritise to identify antisocial behaviour. The area is the 2nd highest in the ward behind Netherfield in terms of requests for housing services around housing disrepair, and it's the 2nd highest ward in terms of enforcement notices served by the council. The proposal outlines that the reports we received in the area about housing disrepair equates to a report for 1 in every 4 private rented homes. In Colwick, the next on the table, demonstrates that it's suffering a significant and persistent problem with antisocial behaviour and high concentrations of crime. So Colwick is in close proximity to Netherfield and shares some of the similar challenges around crime and antisocial behaviour that we've experienced in Netherfield. And it's featured previously as a priority plus area, as categorised by the police, and it's been one of the top 15 areas in the county in terms of crime and antisocial behaviour alongside Netherfield. Colwick also, like Carlton Hill, features in the severity profiles, specifically identified to tackle antisocial behaviour. And there is a high volume of private rented homes in the area, as with all four of these areas listed in the table. Daybrook has significant problem with persistent antisocial behaviour, poor property conditions and high concentrations of crime. Daybrook is the 5th highest ranked ward in the borough per 1,000 residents in terms of antisocial behaviour and crime, and over the past 5 years Daybrook has had the highest volume of antisocial behaviour reports out of the 4 proposed areas. Daybrook is the 3rd highest ward in the borough in terms of housing service requests and the 4th highest in terms of housing enforcement notices. The ratio between complaints and private sector housing equates to 1 complaint for every 5 private rented homes in the area. Newstead Village suffers with a significant and persistent problem with antisocial behaviour, high concentrations of crime and poor property conditions. Newstead is the 2nd highest in the borough in terms of antisocial behaviour per 1,000 residents. And in terms of property conditions, receives 5% of the total volume of service requests about housing conditions in Newstead Village, and again 5% of enforcement notices are also served in Newstead Village. In terms of service requests, equates to 1 in 3 private rented homes will receive reports about housing conditions. Deprivation was one of the criteria that we've also considered in terms of looking at the data sets. A number of these areas do suffer with high levels of deprivation, but in terms of the data sets, they lend themselves more to ward-based or ward-wide areas. It was felt for these proposals to reduce the areas to a cluster of streets rather than ward-wide. So, in terms of the proposed areas, Carlton Hill, as we can see on the plan here, outlined in red, is the area to the north of Carlton Hill. So it stretches from Hooton Road down at the bottom of Carlton Hill up to Lowwater Street, and then stretches forth north towards the Honeywood Gardens estate, as the area is outlined on the map. There on the Consultation webpage, there are accessible maps where you can zoom in and search addresses more clearly, and you can identify properties which fall in and outside of the proposed areas. Colwick is outlined on this plan here in red, includes the Valeside Gardens and land to the north of Colwick Loop Road, including Vale Road up to Balmoral Road. As outlined on this plan. The Daybrook area is outlined here in red. It's land to the north of Sherbrook Road. Over to the east, it stretches to Nottingham Road, and then to the north up to Sir John Robinson Way and Wordsworth Road, and then to the west over to Ox Close Lane. And then Newstead Village is on this map. It's the area to the north of Tilford Road. It's the terrace properties between Tilford Road and the industrial estate. So these areas were identified following detailed analysis that's identified in the proposal document on the council's website, considering a number of data sets, looking at crime, antisocial behaviour, deprivation, housing conditions, volumes of private sector housing, private rented housing, and that data was used to plot a number of hotspot maps that are shown within the proposal, and was used to define the areas that I've just talked you through. So they're based on evidence, which can be seen in the proposal. In terms of the licence fees and conditions, so the licence fee for non-accredited landlords was proposed to be £700. That's spread over the 5-year term of the scheme, so that would equate to £2.69 per week. For non-accredited landlords, we are offering a discount and that would, the licence fee there would be £585. The licence fee would be spread over 2 parts, so they are again included within the details on the consultation webpage, but for ease I've just put the total fee here on this slide. In terms of the licence conditions, they come under 6 sort of main headings really, around gas and electrical and fire safety, property management, tenancy management, tackling antisocial behaviour, changes of details and circumstances, and licence holder training. We do have a local accreditation partner, Dash Services. They operate across the East Midlands and they work closely with Gedling Borough Council. They provide accreditation to landlords locally and have probably the main accreditation provider that landlords in the Neverfield scheme have chosen to go with. Their details are available here. Dash also provide the Call Before You Serve service across the East Midlands. So that's a scheme that you can find from that website for landlords who may have challenges with tenants, whether they be financial or tenancy related issues. Dash provide a service to support with engaging with tenants and providing support, you know, in terms of the economic climate and the challenges that we have at the moment. So, you know, if landlords are in a situation where they are facing problems with tenants, then contact Dash, and they should be able to signpost you and provide you with some support. How will selective licensing improve the proposed areas? So Tom's given a mention some of the benefits that we've seen in Neverfield. So some of this is repeated, but we see the proactive inspections and site visits that the scheme enables, the dedicated staffing resource for regulating private rented housing. As Tom's described, the improvements in property conditions to bring properties up to minimum legal standards, and improvements in property management. Essentially what the licensing scheme requires is good practice from all landlords operating in the proposed areas, and that's really set out in the framework of the licence conditions. It also enables the council and partners to work in collaboration to address issues identified in the area. So Tom's mentioned some of the referrals we've been able to make to partners, also some of the intelligence we're able to share, and some of the problem solving we're able to bring partners together to improve the area. And then last on the slide, we're able to promote and signpost to other services such as grants or support services that will bring benefits to either landlords or tenants, and just generally improve the area. So how to respond to the consultation. So the webpage is there listed, can be found on the council's website. There's further information in terms of the proposal, the detailed maps of the proposed areas, the licence conditions, the proposed fees, and then there's a survey on that webpage for anybody to complete, and those any answers will be submitted through to the council, and then they'll be considered by decision makers. All answers will be analysed and assessed when considering the consultation, and fed through to decision makers. Alternatively, we will accept comments in writing to Gedling Borough Council Public Protection Service if that's deemed a more appropriate way. But I would recommend people check out the survey on our website, as it's fairly user friendly and takes people through the proposal step by step. So that's the end of my presentation now, and the presentations that we've got for you today. We do have opportunity now for questions and answers. Do we have any questions? I think my colleague Sally was going to present to the panel.
Sorry, we do have questions. Yeah, they've been coming in while speakers have been talking. One of the questions, or the first question, is from Giles Inman from EMPO. How does Gedling Borough Council intend to inspect up to another 900 properties when they have only inspected 60% so far in Netherfield under the existing scheme?
Okay, I can answer that one if you want some.
Okay.
So, I mean, unfortunately, because of coronavirus, we've had to adapt our approach to property inspections, which has meant that we have had to postpone them, unfortunately. We have used that time to focus on processing and issuing the licences, and the council is committed to carrying out inspections of all properties. Still, it will just be carried out in a different order. So we envisage that property inspections will commence again early next year, January, February, and that all property inspections for phase 1 will be carried out and concluded way before the phase 2 is brought in. That will then mean that if phase 2 does come in, then the council will be able to start with a clean slate. The new scheme will allow additional staff to be employed, which will enable an increase in property inspections going forward for the new scheme.
Okay. Thank you, Tom.
Okay. Sorry, did you want to go ahead,
No,
Sam?
I was going to say, do you have any further questions, Sally?
The next question from Phil Saunders: will you be offering the discount to agents who are Safe Agent accredited? Will you recognise the training that Safe Agent provides?
Okay, shall I answer that one? I'm not aware of any applications that we've had with accreditation with that body, but that's not to say that we wouldn't recognise it. I'd need to have a look at that organisation and see what their training and accreditation consisted of. But the list isn't exclusive. If the training and accreditation status suggests that accredited landlords or agents are up to a higher standard and operating to a higher standard, then there's no reason why that wouldn't be included in the accreditation discount.
Civil penalties and improvement notices have Gedling Borough Council issued in the 4 wards they propose to introduce selective licensing in between January 2017 and the present time.
Is that one for you, Sam?
Yeah, I can attempt to answer that. The details, I think, will be found within the proposal document. The notes I've got in front of me here is we've served 37 notices, but I think that's borough-wide rather than the 4 specific areas. But as I said, there are some charts within the proposal which outline the areas with the highest rates of enforcement. And when I talked through that table on the presentation, I recall a number of those areas were the higher areas in terms of where we've taken enforcement action. In terms of civil penalties, we've not served any civil penalties in those areas as yet, but you know, I've got investigations ongoing. So I hope that answers the question.
I could probably add something to that, Sally. So if we go back to my presentation where I said that we've highlighted 33 properties with imminent risk, which is where a council could and normally would serve notices. In 32 of those instances, we've worked with the landlord informally to bring about the improvements, and not always just the landlord, also the tenant. So when we're talking about means of escape and layout, we've worked with the landlord and tenant, so maybe the tenant sleeps in a different room until the escape window is fitted. So if you were to look at those interventions just based on the number of notices we'd served, it would look low, but we have actually removed imminent risk in 33 houses. And I think in all of those circumstances where enforcement wasn't taken, the landlords and agents would be happy that we hadn't served the enforcement notices and that we'd work with them to bring about those improvements.
Yeah, I think to add to what Tom said, I mean, you know, measure of enforcement notices and civil penalties is just one metric. There are a number of other ways of identifying poor property conditions. Our enforcement policy is that we work informally with landlords, as you'd expect, to try and reach agreement, to try and reach compromise and ensure improvements are brought about. So, you know, 99% of the cases we deal with are dealt with informally by giving advice, information, supporting landlords to comply and agents. Enforcement action is really sort of a last resort where we haven't been able to secure those improvements informally.
Okay, I have to move on to the next question from Giles at MPO. The government has asked local authorities to suspend the types of consultation until COVID-19 is over. Why is Gedling Borough Council ignoring this advice, and how are Gedling Borough Council going to practically prepare and produce this scheme with their staff out of the office?
Okay, I can answer that one. I've not seen specific advice saying that consultations can't go ahead. I mean, there's a number of consultations on the council's website at the moment. You know, business is going on. COVID-19 is obviously a big issue that we're facing as a society, but we are still carrying on a number of services. We're still providing them. We are providing services in a COVID secure way. So yes, we've got less officers in the office, but we're all enabled to work remotely from home. We can use things like Microsoft Teams and remote ways of getting messages to and from the team. The government guidance I've seen pre-lockdown was that you know, inspections can go ahead provided they're in a COVID secure way, and we've done a number of risk assessments to ensure that staff, tenants and landlords are protected if we bring back the proposed inspections, as Tom mentioned, that we're planning to do early next year.
Okay, on to the next question. We have many good landlords doing the right thing and accepting a reduced rent, no rent, and entering into an agreed rent repayment plans. They are keeping tenants in their homes during this awful crisis. Why is the case that Gedling Borough Council want to add further costs to the landlords at this time?
Okay, so at this stage we are carrying out a consultation. It's to seek views from stakeholders to inform decision making. So that's the purpose of this discussion that we're having today, to hear from landlords, the challenges they face, you know, what the market is like out there. You know, obviously we're mindful of the pandemic. No decision has been made as yet to introduce a scheme. You know, decision makers will need to take into account any current issues when they're making a decision that impacts the borough. COVID-19 is one of a number of things that decision makers will need to take into account. What I would say is we'd be sensitive about timing. It's not certainly won't be, you know, if the council decided tomorrow to bring in a scheme, it wouldn't be the next week that we'd be looking to start. I think it's probably you know, well into next year, towards the middle, if not the latter part of next year, before any potential scheme would be looking to come into operation. Hopefully by that time the COVID-19 pandemic will be under control. If you look at the government roadmap, they're expecting by the springtime next year for us to have moved forward as a society. So we'll need to take that into account, and any decisions that are made relate to a future scheme.
The next question from James: how does a licence for landlord tackle high levels of crime in the area?
Do you want me to answer?
You can have a start, Tom.
Yeah. So if you look at the licence conditions, which are what form the basis of the licence, which are sent out, and the licence conditions are what the licence holder must adhere to. There is a section that is focused on tackling antisocial behaviour, which links in with crime. It does formalise what the council would expect the landlord to do if it became apparent that their tenant was causing antisocial behaviour in the area. And as I mentioned on my slides, we do have a close working relationship on the various different partner groups. The police sit on that group. The information that we have through licensing is shared, and it does link into a number of police operations in the area, which are directly linked to crime and antisocial behaviour.
I think if I could just add, you know, we're not just looking at landlord's perspective here, it's also the tenants. So some of those conditions apply to the tenants in terms of how they behave. So it's a partnership approach, really. We, you know, landlords, tenants, the council, the police, all partners need to work together to drive down crime and antisocial behaviour. So what licensing does is it gives us a way of identifying those properties that are private rented and working together to bring about improvements and tackle antisocial behaviour and crime. So it's not just one part of the jigsaw that's responsible for tackling these issues. It really is a team effort, and licensing enables us to do that and work together to tackle those issues.
Okay, and the next question from Giles from EMPO. What measures and resources do the council intend to invest in these proposed areas to deal with the high crime and antisocial behaviour in the community? Selective licensing is one tool to tackle these issues, and by itself it will not solve these issues.
No, so as I've mentioned, it really is a team effort to bring about those improvements. There are a number of projects that the council supported. So a lot of these relate to the police taking the lead, but the council are in the background supporting and sometimes funding these schemes. So we've got Operation Reacher, which is a police initiative to tackle antisocial behaviour, crime, criminal activity. There's a lot of frontline resource there from the police in terms of obtaining warrants to address criminal behaviour. So that has been directly targeted in Netherfield, and a number of properties have been searched as a result of intelligence and partnership working. And the licensing scheme will have fed into some of that. We also have neighbourhood wardens that are out patrolling areas, identifying antisocial behaviour, engaging with young people or people that potentially are perpetrators of antisocial behaviour, trying to break up groups and the like. We also have CCTV in certain areas that the council invests to detect crime and share information with police and partners to tackle issues. There's many things. There's a lot of, there's a whole community safety partnership that operates across South Nottinghamshire that the council's key and involved in, and there's a number of interventions that run out of that every year, linked with the Police and Crime Commissioner to tackle crime and antisocial behaviour.
Happy for me to move on. Another question from Giles. 86% of the 60% of properties inspectors contained HHSRS issues. Why cannot Gedling Borough Council provide a breakdown and categorisation of these hazards? Surely it is vitally important to support your evidence for this new scheme.
I can answer that one. It primarily comes down to the way that the data is recorded on our database and how we would search it. If we needed to get out individual hazards for each individual property, it would mean going into each individual record and pulling that out. That is the basic reason for it. We do record the difference between hazards which are required, and we also record recommended hazards. So the data in the in my presentation, where it says 86%, that is based on the information that we've recorded on the system, and it is accurate. In terms of breaking it down, yeah, I agree. If we had a breakdown of the various different hazards on the HHSRS, for example, it would add a little bit more to it. But I don't think that by not having that breakdown, it takes away from the fact that 86% of those properties is a large percentage where works are required to bring up to a legal minimum standard.
I think also, if I could just add, presentations like what Tom's just given on the Netherfield scheme, we've run those at landlord forums where we share good practice and share findings from our scheme. So we do summarise and report back to landlords in the areas so that they're aware of common issues that we're coming across and hopefully can bring about those improvements. So that is intelligence led. That's from the data that we gather. We just haven't got it in a readily extractable format that we can pull out easily to put on a table, for example.
On to the next question from Alison Nunn. Are the people causing the antisocial behaviour and the high levels of crime actually living in Colwick, and do they live specifically in private rented housing, as we have quite a lot of social housing in Colwick? Can we have a breakdown of the data used?
So I would draw you back to the proposal document. Really, the data that we've got is summarised and presented in that document. We've got a report from the police, a 5-year review that they carried out for us. We don't have individual properties identified within that. For data protection reasons and data security, we wouldn't be able to provide that in terms of properties could then become targeted or etc. or be identified. So it's more broad level examples that we've got within the report, and through the volumes and total numbers you get a picture of the problems in the area. We've got the heat maps and some of that information. There are some case study examples that we've pulled together at the end of the crime and social behaviour chapter. I think it's chapter 5. So there's just some summary examples there of the types of antisocial behaviour and criminal activity that has been associated with private rented homes within those areas. So I'd recommend you have a look through them, and they explain more about it. It's on the proposal document on the website.
Okay, the next question is from Christopher Williams. During a national pandemic where some tenants are struggling to pay their rent, facing potential redundancies, and some are even furloughed and facing uncertain future, why is the council introducing a scheme that is going to increase their rent, as landlords will recover these licence costs from the rent?
Okay. I think I've touched upon this on a previous question. So at this stage, we are simply seeking views. It's a consultation. It's take into account the views of stakeholders before reaching any decisions. Should the council look to introduce a scheme, they'll be sensitive to the climate and the wider issues that are ongoing and facing society. In terms of the increase in rents, that is one option available to landlords to cover licence fees, but there are other options to consider. Potentially, whether any other income can be generated, whether other savings can be made in terms of the way properties are managed or maintained, other efficiencies that could bring about the finances to pay for licence fees. What we would say, as I've mentioned in the presentation, is spread over the 5 years. £2.69 a week is not a massive increase in cost, and obviously bear in mind the long-term picture here, in terms of if we get this right, we improve those areas, house prices are likely to increase, so will the equity within properties over that lifespan. So there are a number of options available to pay for licence fees, not just by increasing rents, but it's a business decision for each landlord and agent to consider, and that's all I've really got to say on that.
Okay, the next question from Jeff. He says, if I have a problem with my landlord, I will sort it out with him. Are you trying to stop private landlords renting properties?
I can answer that one. Unfortunately, it's not quite as simple as that for a lot of tenants out there, and that's the reality of it. Yeah, if you've got a good landlord and they respond well to your complaints, it could be that it is as simple as that, but a lot of tenants, they don't get the response from the landlord, or the tenants are not aware of what standard their house should be at, and their house is actually substandard, which links back into the point that I made on the final slide of my presentation, is that a lot of tenants, they don't really know what the legal minimum standard is for a property. So they may well be living in substandard accommodation and not have thought to report it to the landlord. So you have a skilled professional going in and assessing the house and working with the landlord to bring it up to standard and safeguarding that tenant therefore. Also, as I touched on in my presentation, licensing means that officers are going into the house without the tenant having to make a complaint. So if tenants ask the landlord to carry out a repair and it doesn't happen, or they're not happy with it, then they're in a situation where they either put up with it, or they move out, or they can call environmental health and we will come in with our enforcement powers and bring about change. So what this scheme does is it kind of cuts out that issue for the tenant. The tenant doesn't have to make that complaint. Officers are proactively coming in and officers are proactively making those improvements to those houses, which in turn will benefit the tenants and people visiting those properties.
Okay, on to the next question. Giles Inman from MPO, can you confirm you have issued no CPN since April 2017?
No, that's not correct. We have issued, is it 4 CPNs now, Tom?
We've
We've
issued CPNs in relation to 13 properties. Yeah. It was just not in those areas that Giles specifically asked initially.
Yeah.
The CPNs that have been issued are in the Netherfield ward.
Okay, question from Christopher Williams. Landlords have the responsibility to deal with antisocial behaviour in their rental properties. However, it is unfair for the private landlords being held responsible for the social issue. In most cases, if a tenant is causing antisocial behaviour, the council and police would be introduced. What will having a licence change to this process?
Yes, I think this links into what Sam was saying before, is that it's not as simple as it's all on the landlord. We're saying it's all down to the landlord. It is a partnership, joined up approach, and the landlord and the tenant are two stakeholders in a larger process here. What the licence does is it formalises certain expectations and requirements put onto the landlord to make sure that they're taking positive steps if antisocial behaviour is made apparent to them, and it means that they can't just ignore it. So I would recommend that you have a look at the licence conditions if you're not familiar with them yet. Section D relates to tackling of antisocial behaviour. What it does is it just lays out a few requirements for landlords and what steps should be taken if they become aware of antisocial behaviour. And it's nothing over and above what generally you would normally expect in those situations. It's, make sure that you're addressing it with the tenant, make the tenant aware that you've received a report of antisocial behaviour, record what actions you have taken, so that, yeah, you're right in saying that the police and the council will get involved. When the police and the council get involved, then all of that information will be relevant and will be helpful in tackling that antisocial behaviour in that specific situation. So it's not as simple as saying it's all on the landlord. It's just one part of many to sorting out antisocial behaviour, which, as I'm sure you're all aware, is quite often a very complex issue.
Okay, next question from Phil Saunders. Will the licence fee be reduced pro rata when a licence is applied for partway through a 5-year period covered by the scheme?
So I can start that off, Tom. The licence fee covers the process of administering the licence application and for running the scheme. So, regardless of what point the application is made, the fee is to cover that application. And we can only issue a licence up to the end of the scheme. So if you apply in year 1 straight away, then if your licence gets processed, you get a 5-year licence. If you apply in years 2 or 3, then you get a slightly shortened licence. But it is to cover that cost of providing the staff and resource and for administering the licence, so that we can process the licence and issue them, so that landlords have met their statutory duty to apply for a licence and receive a licence in a licensable area. So if you have anything else to add, Tom?
No, I think that basically covers it.
Another question from Christopher Williams. Will being a member of ALA or having your property managed by an ALA accredited landlord be sufficient to be accredited if the scheme goes ahead?
Okay, so it's important to clarify here. In order to get the accreditation discount, it needs to be a proposed licence holder that is accredited. So if it's just the managing agent that's accredited and they're not going on as a licence holder, and the proposed licence holder is not accredited, then no, you wouldn't qualify for the accreditation discount. If you were accredited under ALA and you were going down as a proposed licence holder, then you would qualify for the accreditation discount.
Okay, a question from James. If working together as a team with police and tenants to tackle crime, then perhaps you should look at sharing the cost of the licence between all parties.
Well, could you repeat that, Sally? Sorry.
Yeah, if working together as a team with the police and tenants to tackle crime, then perhaps you should look at sharing the cost of the licence between all parties.
I mean, I'm not sure if that's a question or a statement. I understand where you're coming from. The council has to follow the legislative framework for bringing in a licensing scheme, which is dictated under the Housing Act. And it is the Housing Act that dictates how the scheme can be implemented. And that is the process that the council is following, and that is why it will go down the route of the landlord having to pay, or the applicant or the agent or whoever having to pay the application fee.
I think what my interpretation of that also is there is a lot of other resource that goes into tackling antisocial behaviour and crime. So there's a whole police force out there. There are other officers involved at the council. I mentioned things like CCTV, neighbourhood wardens. There's lots of other resource that isn't funded by selective licensing that contributes to tackling crime and antisocial behaviour.
Sam, if I can just add to that point, just okay, to reinforce that all of the areas that are identified within the scheme are very regularly the centre of joint plans and operations between police, council and other agencies. It's just important to remember that the question was around landlords and their responsibilities, and just to add to that, and assure people taking part that in all those areas we are regularly working together with the agencies, including organisations like fire and social services, etc., putting extra effort and energy into those areas to reduce crime and antisocial behaviour. Thank you.
Okay, sticking with the antisocial behaviour questions from Alison Nunn. With a high level of crime and antisocial behaviour in the Arnold area, why is this area not being brought into the scheme?
Okay, so the proposal document was put together after a review of the whole borough. We did look at ward by ward, street by street, area by area, and it was considered that the 4 proposed areas were the ones that meet the government criteria for introducing selective licensing. So those are the ones that are outlined in the proposal document. Arnold will have been considered within that review, as will other areas of the borough, but it's those 4 areas together with Netherfield are the main areas of the borough that meet the government's criteria for introducing selective licensing.
Can I just come in on that? I mean, we seem to be getting a bit fixated on antisocial behaviour. I think nobody's suggesting that all antisocial behaviour is the responsibility of tenants in privately rented accommodation. And going back to what Dave Wakeling said earlier on, yes, there's a lot of work going on to address the crime and ASB in the Arnold area by the police and the council working together.
Okay, for the next question, is everyone happy to move on?
Yeah.
Yep. From Gavin Dick at NRLA. The NRLA would like clarification on support over antisocial behaviour in relation to helping a landlord when a Section 21 notice or future notice as currently being consulted upon is served. What steps will the council take to support the landlord? It would be useful if the council were to put in place a guidance document before the introduction of the scheme to outline its position regarding helping landlords to remove tenants who are causing antisocial behaviour.
Okay, I think what I would say is, if landlords are in that situation, contact the council, contact our team, and we will look to deal with them on a case-by-case basis. Fortunately, it's not the vast majority of landlords that are in this situation. It's a smaller issue, so we can help provide support. I've mentioned the call before you serve. I don't know if Linda Cobb and Dash are on the call, but hopefully that would be something that scheme would also support in terms of landlords that are near the point where they're evicting tenants. But as I say, contact us, and we'll try to put support measures in place to try and help resolve any issues and support the landlord. I think it's likely if it was the Section 21 was served linked to the licensing scheme, that we're already having conversations with landlords and council officers at an earlier stage. So really at that point we can look at what support we can provide.
Sam, if I can just add to that answer, please. So you mentioned in a previous answer the ongoing work we have with the police through local bi-weekly meetings.
Yeah.
It's at those meetings that conversations around particular properties and individuals that might be concerned with committing ASB are discussed in great depth. We also have a designated officer within the wardens that specialises in complex ASB. So I do think we could make that clear as part of the scheme what the council can do in terms of a route way into accessing support and advice around dealing with tenants, and just to assure landlords and agents that are on the call listening to the broadcast that we do have a service that we'd be more than happy to have you engage with. Thank you. Sally, do you have any more questions? I'm just.
Yeah, apologies for the.
Thank you.
For
Perhaps
the
just take a couple. We'll take a couple more. Thank you.
Yeah. Further question from Giles at Empire. The council have extensive powers over 100 laws and 400 regulations to deal with landlords who are renting badly managed properties. Why not enforce the powers you have instead of introducing more costly licensing and higher rents?
I can start on that question. As mentioned, really, the licensing scheme gives the council the resources to bring about those improvements, to do the property inspections, to process the licence applications. It's a targeted scheme. It's not borough-wide. It is a proportion of the borough, up to sort of 20%. It's not the vast majority of the borough that we're looking at in terms of licensing. So we are focusing resources at the areas that the evidence shows need that attention, and I think you'll see from the presentation that Tom gave for the Nevfield area the problems that we found in that area, and through working with landlords we're able to bring about improvements. So it's really wanting to ensure that other areas of the borough benefit from those same improvements, so that they don't get left behind. We want to improve all of the borough, not just Netherfield, for example.
That's it for the questions for now.
Okay.
Thank you, Sally. So if I can just thank those landlords and managing agents that have joined the broadcast today, and thank you for your questions. This is, as we've said a couple of times throughout the broadcast, a consultation opportunity. We're grateful for the questions. We would encourage you to engage with the process through the means that Sam identified in his presentation, so through the council website or to ourselves in writing. If I can, once again, thank you for your participation today, and for the officers and Councillor Ellis for taking part and coordinating the event, and to Sam particularly and Tom for going through a detailed presentation. Thanks so much indeed, and I'd like to now end the broadcast. Thank you.